Welcome to Wednesday, everyone. You are watching CBC News BC. I am Jessica Chung here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Here's what you need to know today. The Canadian Coast Guard is monitoring an American-owned barge that's damaged and is taking on water off the BC Central Coast. Now, the barge is loaded with containers and was traveling from Alaska to Seattle. And a director with the Helsik Integrated Resources Management Department says the barge has been moved to a more protected area that is less exposed to wind. Now, he adds that events like these happen too frequently.
The coastal First Nations, including Helsik, have been, opposing the lifting of the tanker traffic ban on the coast. This is why we're standing up to that, because we're just lucky that this is a container ship and not an oil barge that's in this situation. And so it just highlights the issue, and that it's happened numerous times in the last 10 years.
Now, another barge is heading to the area, and some of the cargo will be transferred to it to lighten up the load on the damaged vessel. And there are no reports of pollution near Bella Bella. And new measles exposures have been reported in the province's northeast. Northern Health says there's been 4 new locations where measles was present in Fort St. John. And that was between Wednesday, November 12th and Saturday, November 15th. Now, the locations include Olympus Cards and Collectibles, the Walmart on 96A Street, North Peace Leisure Pool, and the Fort St. John Hospital ER. Now, this comes as Canada officially lost its measles elimination status earlier this month, and cases continue to spread across the country, including notably in BC's northeast. And more than 60,000 healthcare workers in BC have a new tentative 4-year agreement with the province. Now, if ratified, members will receive a 3% wage increase each year. And it's the same as what government workers were able to secure this fall after an 8-week labor dispute then. Now, the members include food service workers, cleaners, lab assistants, and nursing unit assistants who work in hospitals and at long-term care facilities. And ratification vote will be held in December online. And a reproductive advocacy group is pushing for more consistent pain management during IUD insertions in a new campaign called Not Just a Pinch. Now, more and more people across BC are choosing to use intrauterine devices ever since the province started covering the cost of birth control. But the insertion is often painful and performed without any sedatives.
Women are expected to tolerate pain, especially when it surrounds gynecological procedures. And oftentimes individuals are told to take an Advil after going through this invasive procedure. Yeah. But the reality is that this is a procedure that occurs in sensitive tissue. And just like any other procedure, pain relief must be offered. That's the bottom line.
Now, the group is calling for the province to set specific guidelines for pain management during the insertion process and mandatory training for all practitioners on pain management and trauma-informed care. And that's it for me. You are watching CBC News BC. We've got lots more for you, so stay tuned. I'm Jessica Chung. Don't go anywhere, because BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. It appears BC will take steps to address trade barriers with other provinces. Jobs Minister Ravi Kahlon will make an announcement coming up at 12:15. We will bring that to you live. And we're asking, how significant is this pivot going to be in the fight with the U.S.? BC's Treaty Commissioner as well will join us, George Abbott, after 12:30. He'll join us with his thoughts on the Cowichan Nation land rights decision and what role treaties can play in moving forward on reconciliation. He'll also take your questions. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. In a few minutes, BC's Jobs and Economic Growth Minister is set to make an announcement in Victoria. It's all about addressing interprovincial trade barriers. So we'll bring that to you live when it starts. We're watching it right now. They're setting up the podium as we speak. And of course, removing trade barriers between provinces has been a major focus amidst the U.S. trade war. Earlier this month, the federal government announced the Free Trade and Labor Mobility Act as well. Well, we want to hear from you, especially if you run a business. What challenges have you seen in trying to do business with other provinces? What are those barriers? And is pivoting to more interprovincial trade enough to fight the effects of U.S. tariffs? You can call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we're watching your comments on our TikTok Live. Joining me here in studio is Laura Jones, President and CEO of the Business Council of B.C. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you again.
What are the biggest barriers in interprovincial trade that concern you?
Well, what's interesting about our journey on interprovincial trade as a country is we have made progress over the past 30 years. Sometimes we get so focused on the areas where we are not doing well that we forget to maybe acknowledge that there has been progress. So in 1995, we had the Agreement on Internal Trade come into play. And I mean, just the idea that we wanted to trade with each other was a good step forward. But that agreement was widely, sort of by the time the Canada Free Trade Agreement came into play in 2017, it was widely considered a bit of a gong show, partly because you were only included in that those goods that free trade applied to if you were on what's called a positive list. So you had to be on the list. Well, imagine how many new goods and services had been created. And
what does it mean to be on the positive list?
So on the positive list would be we would have free trade in, say, forest products, or we would have free trade in mining products. But if you weren't on the list, so there were whole new categories of goods that came into play, computer parts that didn't exist in 1995 when the agreement was first negotiated, then you wouldn't be included in the agreement. So it was a really outdated way of approaching trade agreements. And the rest of the world had moved on to a much more modern approach called a negative list, which means you are subject to the free trade agreement unless you are specifically on a list that says you are not. And what that does is it makes it really transparent. People can see, okay, you have an exemption and you are not on the list. Well, does that make sense to us? And we can challenge each other, and media can ask questions about it. So it was a much more transparent way of doing things. But what it didn't cover was regulatory standards. So there are all kinds of barriers that, yes, you can sell. My favorite example, Michelle, is a construction company in Ontario said, yeah, you can sell toilet seats across Canada, but we have very specific rules in Ontario that require them to be have a specific kind of lid. So if that's the kind of toilet seat you produce in BC, you can sell it to Ontario, but nobody can use it on their work site.
There's no uniformity.
Yeah, so there was so it was like, and that's what I think that the premiers are now looking to change. And I'd like them to go further, and we can get into that, but that would be a good next step.
What sectors have been most affected, have suffered under that, do you think?
Well, it affects all the sectors, and but one that is high profile and that is right in consumers' face is, of course, liquor rules and restrictions. So Manitoba is the only province where a resident can ship themselves a case of wine or beer or spirits from another province. So in BC, you can ship wine to other provinces and they can receive our wine, but not beer. So provinces have some really interesting restrictions on alcohol. And the problem with that is not so much that it's a huge hit on the economy, it's the signal it sends to people outside of this country. Wow, you can't even ship wine between provinces? You know, that tells us something about how easy it is to do business between provinces.
I see. And it's what we've heard from consumers, right? Especially when it comes to wine, when it comes to what you can buy and where you can purchase from.
Sure.
So do you think that that lack of progress when it comes to pursuing interprovincial trade, has that been because of the relationship, that tight-knit relationship with the United States?
Yeah, I think we haven't had to. I think for a while, actually, we have been less concerned about the things that drive the economy than we should be. And so the Premier of Manitoba, again, I'm using Manitoba a lot here, but has a great way of putting this. He says the economy is the horse that pulls the social cart. And I think we've kind of been concerned about the social cart, rightly so, but we also need to worry about the economy. And interprovincial trade is one of those things that can sound kind of boring and like low priority. And then we've also taken this approach where all the premiers have to agree and then they take one step together. Well, you know how it is when you travel with 10 people. It's hard to get everyone to agree on where to go, right? It's much faster when you're doing it on your own. So that slowed things down because different provinces have different concerns.
There's that as well, and I'll ask you more about that. My guest, Laura Jones, President and CEO of the Business Council of BC. We are getting ready to bring you a press conference with Jobs Minister Ravi Kahlon, and it's all to do with addressing interprovincial trade barriers. So we'll find out what the province will announce there, but we're also asking you, especially if you run a business, what's been the most challenging in trying to do trade with another province? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can also leave a comment on our TikTok Live or send us an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And we have Sasha calling us now from 150 Mile House, who is a small business person. Hi, Sasha. Welcome.
Hello, how are you today?
I am just fine. And so tell us about the challenges you face, what kind of business you're in, and what it's like trying to sell or buy from another province.
I'm in primarily automotive and welding and fabrication, light mechanical, kind of being self-employed. You kind of do whatever comes through the doors in the shop that can help make revenue to put food on the table for the family, right?
Sure.
So,
yeah.
One thing that kind of piqued my interest when I heard this topic come up on the radio here as I'm traveling. Of course, I'm stopped on the side of the road. Is when we purchase a vehicle from another province, bringing it into British Columbia, it always is subject to inspection from a British Columbia inspection facility, which always seems kind of like an unnecessary tax, especially on our modern vehicles where, you know, they've been imported into Canada under Transport Canada requirements. They meet all the Canadian requirements, which from a safety point of view is across the board from one province to the next. Sometimes you say you buy a vehicle, not only do you have to pay the PST if you buy a vehicle from Alberta, but it has to go for interprovincial inspection. Same thing goes if you take something from British Columbia and you want to register it in Alberta.
So it's added costs then?
Yeah, it's added cost and time. Some of those inspections cost a couple $100, and it makes it so that you can't. You think twice about buying something from another province, right? That's all. That's my question.
Sasha, thank you very much for the call. Really interesting point there. I know that Jobs Minister Ravi Kahlon has just stepped up to the podium. I'm going to take your reaction to Sasha's call and the announcement from the minister in a moment here. But right now, let's go live to Ravi Kahlon.
speaking people. Recognize the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Great to be here with my colleague Paul Choi, Parliamentary Secretary for Trade, and of course Bridget Anderson, who's the CEO and President of Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. I want to thank you all for being here and in my office. It kind of does feel weird to see you all here, but it's nice to have you here. Now is the time for action. And while we're facing economic threats from the US and significant global instability, British Columbians and Canadians expect their government to respond with urgency. This week, we released Look West, our targeted action plan designed to rise to the challenges brought out by Trump tariffs, as well as worldwide economic uncertainty. The plan lays out a path ahead to deliver jobs and opportunities for people. Nearly half of the federal government's priority projects, are here in British Columbia, and this recognizes that BC will drive the Canadian economy as we go forward. And our biggest resources, our hardworking British Columbians, are up to the challenge. Now, we're facing global inflation, and we're dealing with ongoing instability and chaos south of the border directed towards us by the Trump administration. These challenges have provided Canadians with a new urgency to tackle interprovincial trade barriers head-on, and BC is leading the way. Today, I'm pleased to say that we have managed to bring together the federal government and all 13 provinces and territories in an unprecedented collaboration. Today, we'll be signing the Canadian Mutual Recognition Agreement, removing regulatory barriers to the free movement of goods across provinces. And we're going to start doing that by without lowering standards or compromising safety. We are our best facing, we are positioned to be able to face the threats from the US administration here if we work together. That's why, with BC as the chair, this initiative under the Canadian Free Trade Reconciliation Process, our government is proposed and led the nationwide effort to allow businesses to more freely expand their reach across the country. This agreement makes it easier for goods that meet the rules in one province or territory to be sold across Canada without extra approvals, labels, or testing. This applies nearly to all goods except for food. For businesses, it means they can sell across Canada, save time and costs, have a bigger reach, grow and create new jobs. For BC consumers, it means more choices, competitive pricing, and some same trusted standards across the country. And for global investors and companies, we're talking about ease of doing business, reliable and high sustainable standards, and integrated supply chains. We are creating one agreement, one market, and unlimited opportunity across the country. This means stronger BC economy and more jobs across industry. We're talking billions in unlocked potential. Research shows that removal of internal trade barriers through mutual recognition could boost Canada's GDP by up to $200 billion. That's why eliminating interprovincial trade barriers is a goal and part of our Look West strategy. I'll close by saying this. This agreement is decades in the making. I'm proud that we finally reached this milestone with BC's leadership. I want to thank the team at the Ministry of Jobs and Economic Growth who have made this possible with their really hard work. I want to thank in particular my Deputy Minister, Fazil Millar, Assistant Deputy Minister, Kevin Volk, Executive Director, Steve Anderson, Robert Musgrave, Havan Semi, and the rest of the trade policy team. I want to say a big thank you for your leadership and all the work you've been doing to make today a reality. This is an important step, but it's just one step in the work that BC has still to do. And this is the largest red tape reduction in Canada's history, and it's just the beginning. Now, we've got to capture this momentum as we continue to build strong Canadian economy with free movement of all goods and services at its core. As detailed in Look West, BC is fully advocating for the expanded nature to include services and food. While the work continues, we also expect to have information and resources available for businesses posted by the end of the year. And we'll continue to work with our partners, both public and private, to build on this momentum, to make sure that it's easier to trade within our borders and to rely less on the United States of America. On that note, I'm really pleased to have with me today Bridget Anderson, and I'd like to invite Bridget to share her perspective on what this means for the business community. Thank you, Bridget.
Thanks very much, Minister Kahlon, for inviting me to be part of this announcement today. Today marks meaningful progress towards a more open, predictable, and competitive Canadian market. For years, many years, businesses have been held back by a patchwork of rules that can sometimes make it harder to move goods across provincial borders than across international ones. The economic cost has been well documented. Internal trade barriers are estimated to reduce Canada's GDP by tens of billions of dollars each year. That is why today's announcement matters. By advancing a more consistent framework for recognizing goods across the provinces, governments are taking an important step towards reducing duplication, lowering costs, and giving businesses, especially small and medium businesses, the ability to grow. The business community has long called for a simple principle. If a product is approved for sale in one province, it should be approved in all provinces. Mutual recognition is a proven international best practice, and it's encouraging to see the actions today. Mutual recognition should reduce complexity that has often acted as a hidden tax on growth. Mutual recognition was one of the primary recommendations that we made in our internal trade report in February, part of our Agenda for Growth, the 3% Challenge. Through our World Trade Centre Vancouver, with the support of the province of BC and Canada, we help small businesses export to new countries for the first time and get the skills they need to export. Given the actions of our largest trading partner, trade diversification is critical. At the same time, the announcement today recognizes that we have an untapped domestic market. Today's announcement is good news, and we are thankful to the province for their role in negotiating the agreement. And while today is worth celebrating, it is important to encourage the momentum towards further integration and opportunity domestically, especially as we look towards food, alcohol, as well as improving labor mobility. As Canadians, we must meet the moment and build a stronger and more resilient economy in every province and every territory.
You are listening there to Bridget Anderson, the CEO and president of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, and Jobs Minister Ravi Kahlon also just announcing this new agreement. And it's an agreement that actually is signed by all provinces and territories and the federal government. And it's called the Canadian Mutual Recognition Agreement, essentially allowing products that meet the rules in one province or territory to be sold elsewhere in Canada without extra approvals, labels, or testing. This does apply to products except for food right now. So they're saying they would like to expand that. Love your reaction. What do you think of this step? And has that been a challenge? We just heard from a mechanic at 150 Mile House saying an extra step for cars that are purchased in other provinces. That was a barrier for him. So what do you think of this announcement right now? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733. Joining me in studio is Laura Jones, the president and CEO of the Business Council of B.C. Laura, it's very much on theme as to what we were talking about earlier, right? That repetition, replication of rules. Ravi Kahlon said this is the largest red tape reduction in Canada's history. What do you think? Is that true?
Well, I think it's certainly a significant reduction in red tape in an area where it is really difficult to make progress. So when we look across years, there are a lot of times where there are big announcements coming out of meetings between trade ministers across Canada or premiers across Canada, and then they're not followed by big action. So I want to congratulate the minister as well for making this happen, because I don't think we should underestimate how difficult it is to get 10 provinces and 3 territories to agree to anything. So I think this is big progress. Having said that, I would also say that this is, and I'm pleased to hear the minister acknowledge this is a big step forward, but we're not done. We still have a lot of work to do on interprovincial trade barriers. And Sasha, the caller, just before we went to listen to Minister Kahlon, gave a good example of this. You know, when you need to have a good inspected in one province, when it's good enough for another provinces to meet their health and safety standards, those are the kinds of things we need to deal with. We should be just saying, hey, if it's safe enough for Alberta, it's safe enough for British Columbia, if it's safe enough for Manitoba, it's safe enough for British Columbia. And if it's not, let's make a list of those things and be transparent about it. But in other words, you're in unless we specifically say you're out, and then we'll have a list of that and we can deal with that going
What do you
forward.
make, what do you make of the exclusion of food right now?
That's a pretty big exclusion when you think about it. That's a lot of trade.
Products, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of products. So I suspect that was a particular province or a few provinces, and this is where and that was probably a compromise that was made at the table to move forward with what we could all agree on, and then deal with that one later. But this is what I mean. We've still got a lot of work to do to reduce those barriers. Food, services, regulatory standards. Regulatory standards right now are being dealt with one at a time. So, oh yeah, your eyeglass protection, I guess we could all agree on that, but it's taking years to do that. First aid kits was another one that made the news a number of years ago. We should just be recognizing that each other's regulatory standards are good enough, unless they're not, and then put it on a negative list and let's be transparent about it. That would really help business.
Laura Jones, it's good to have you here for immediate reaction to this announcement. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Laura Jones is the president and CEO of the Business Council of BC. Much more coverage of this throughout the day here on CBC, of course. And again, just announced a few moments ago, a Canadian mutual recognition agreement signed by all provinces and territories and the federal government, essentially allowing products that meet the rules in one province or territory to be sold across Canada without extra approvals, labels, or testing. This applies to products except for food at this point. I'd love to hear from you, BC Today at cbc.ca. Right now, we actually have a caller on the line to comment on this. Bonnie in Nelson. Hi, what are your thoughts?
Oh, God, I'm one of the luckiest people in this, Nelson. Anyway, no, this is I was listening. Of course, I always listen to you. You got my poetry book. Listen, I'm a very political woman, and I've been in Canada since 1969, and I left the United States. And we have been trading up north and south for so many years. Everybody goes down there and they get this cheap and all this stuff. We should be trading with the provinces, east and west and north. And we should tell those people down there, especially with this damn government, that they can go piss up a rope. Because I'm telling you, we have an incredible country here. And these barriers between provinces coming down, I mean, it should have been done years ago, but I'm really, really, really optimistic that we're finally seeing that we have an incredible country, and we don't have to go north and south. We can go west and east and west and north.
Bonnie, thank you so much thank you very much for the call, Bonnie from Nelson. I do apologize if anyone found some of that language offensive, but your point about going east and west rather than north and south seems to be the theme of this announcement today. And again, this agreement, when it comes to removing trade barriers, essentially saying that products that have been approved in one province or territory can be sold across Canada without extra approvals, labels, or testing, applying right now to products except for food. You're with BC Today. It is 12:30 now. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Much more coverage of the Canada Mutual Agreement that's just been signed, recognition agreement that's just been signed. You'll have that throughout the day here on CBC, of course. And I assume reaction from across the country and other provinces and territories too. Right now it is 12:30, and following the news update, we are going to be joined by BC's Treaty Commissioner, George Abbott, and he's a former BC Liberal cabinet minister. He is watching the reaction to the Cowichan Tribes land rights decision and all the discussion and debate around that. So he'll join us with his thoughts, and as well take your calls and your questions about the process, about the treaty process, and what progress is being made right now. So George Abbott will be my guest in a few moments to take your calls on the open line. Right now it is time for a CBC News update, and here's Liam Britton.
Good afternoon. A man has received a 7-year prison sentence after a home invasion last year motivated by an attempt to steal cryptocurrency. According to Port Moody Police, Se Wing Boas Chan was sentenced after pleading guilty to multiple charges, including break and enter and sexual assault. The sentence includes a DNA order and a weapons ban for the crime in the city's Heritage Woods neighborhood. The investigation remains active as police believe Chan did not act alone in the attack. The federal government, which is in talks with Alberta about building a new pipeline, is considering allowing some tanker traffic on the northern BC coast. That comes from reporting first out of the Globe and Mail. But Liberal MPs from BC say Wednesday the tanker ban on the northern BC coast can't change without consent from First Nations and Victoria. Premier David Eby has been highly critical of Alberta's push for a new pipeline to the Pacific. And sticking with the BC coast, plans are underway to offload cargo from a Seattle-bound container barge that's taken on water off BC Central Coast near Bella Bella. The Healthsick Integrated Resources Management Department says the vessel doesn't seem to be taking on any more water, but is listing extremely low. The plan is to split its load between two barges and for both vessels to carry on to Seattle. And that's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Liam, thank you. I'm wondering, how are your karaoke skills?
Depends what I've consumed that evening, but we'll go with creative. We'll go with off the wall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ear piercing? No.
Ear piercing? Yeah. I mean, it's up to everyone's individual judgment, I would say.
Yeah. Do you have a go-to song?
I like, what do I like? I like Psycho Killer by Talking Heads, a Bizarre Love Triangle, New Order.
Oh, good one.
Some new wave.
Yes.
Gotta have a little of that.
I love it. And I'm asking you because, of course, we have our Make the Season Kind programming, special programming coming up.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be great, and it includes karaoke. So they're calling it Kindness Karaoke. You can hear it on the morning show and the afternoon shows. Maybe a little Liam Britton special appearance? Who knows? Only
kind.
What was that?
I don't know if you could describe my karaoke as kind, at least not to the ears of listeners.
Okay, why don't we test it out? Maybe after we'll give you a little audition. And
technical issues. We got to go.
Something happens with Liam's mic. Liam, thank you very much. With Liam Britton in the CBC Vancouver newsroom, and yes, of course, CBC's annual campaign in support of food banks in BC is coming up. It's called Make the Season Kind, all happening Friday, December the 5th, a full day of special programming to inspire you to be kind to those in need. I'll be on air from noon to 3 with Margaret Gallagher, host of North by Northwest, all of it taking place on stage at the CBC Plaza in downtown Vancouver. You can come join us, and you can make a donation anytime. Just go to cbc.ca/kindbc. Again, Friday, December the 5th. It's 12:34 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for being with us. Well, reaction and tension continues after a landmark BC Supreme Court ruling affirming that the Cowichan Nation has Aboriginal title to a parcel of land in Richmond. All the parties are appealing, including the BC and federal government, the City of Richmond, and the Cowichan Nation. In Richmond, private landowners say they're living with the uncertainty of what the ruling means for them. And the BC government is seeking a stay to pause the implementation of the ruling until the appeal is resolved. Watching all of this closely is BC's Treaty Commissioner, George Abbott. He is a former BC Liberal cabinet minister, and his new book is called Unceded: Understanding British Columbia's Colonial Past and Why It Matters Now. George Abbott is joining me as my guest this half hour, and he is taking your calls. So you can call in and ask us your questions about what the Cowichan Nation ruling means and what do you want to know about the BC treaty process right now. You can call us, just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And of course, always watching your comments on our TikTok Live. And George Abbott, welcome to the show.
Very, very nice to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's very good to have you. And you were appointed early this year as BC Treaty Commissioner. You know, I've known you as a BC Liberal cabinet minister, Minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation as well. From your vantage point, as you watch the news following this Supreme Court ruling that was in August, what are your thoughts on the debate that has ensued?
Well, I think in some measure it has been a constructive debate. I think it has also spawned, as one might expect, some more divisive rhetoric. But it's a BC Supreme Court decision. It will be tested at both the BC Court of Appeal and very likely at the Supreme Court of Canada. So, you know, I think people need to keep things into perspective. This is a BC Supreme Court decision that may well be rebalanced at other levels or not. We don't know, and I'm not a lawyer, and I wouldn't even guess at what the outcome would be. But I don't think it's appropriate really to get too divisive about it at this point.
What is your main takeaway? You say that some of it has become divisive, some of the debate has been useful. You know, what do you want to take away from it?
Well, my life is empty enough, Michelle, that I actually read the decision.
800 pages or so, yeah?
800 pages, almost 4,000 paragraphs. And there's a key paragraph that I found, which I think kind of summed it up from my perspective. Clearly, Madam Justice Young felt very, very emotionally strong about her belief that the Cowichan Nations had suffered an injustice. She clearly wants the federal and provincial governments to remedy that injustice. And she said she was declaring the fee simple titles invalid, defective and invalid in order to move the parties back to the negotiating table quickly. I think, unfortunately, her remedy really didn't match her intentions, and I think the provincial government, in particular, is very uncomfortable with that declaration around fee simple title, and don't want it on the books in the future. So I think inadvertently, Madam Justice Young has actually pushed the parties on to appeal further litigation rather than negotiation. But again, this is likely something we would have to go through in any event.
You are involved in, you know, what you're looking at right now is the treaty process and negotiations. And I've read that your advice would be for all parties to negotiate. How likely is that at this point?
Well, I think it's actually very likely. The treaty tables continue, pardon me, at the BC Treaty Commission. We have three treaties, Comox, Kitsilus, and Kitsum-Kalem, that will be in the legislature for ratification in 2026. There are a few other, perhaps up to several tables that we will see completed in the next 2 to 3 years. So I think there's lots of great work being done at the Treaty Commission by the parties to those negotiations. I haven't seen any tendency to back away from negotiation as a consequence of the Cowichan decision. In fact, I think there is a sense that, because the Cowichan injustice was certainly not the only one in the province, because of some of the ways, and I describe them in my book, some of the policies that flowed out of the colonial era really created the kinds of situations that we see with Cowichan. There's probably many dozens or perhaps over 100 situations like it. We need to negotiate those out. We can't be going to the courts trying to deal with the many dispossessions that we've seen across British Columbia's history.
My guest is George Abbott, the BC Treaty Commissioner, and he's joining us today to discuss the treaty process and thoughts on the Cowichan Nation land rights ruling, the BC Supreme Court ruling, and the debate that has ensued since then. So you can give us a call. What are your questions about the implications of this ruling? And what are your questions about the BC treaty process? And we'll get into that with him as well in terms of where we are when it comes to finalizing treaties in more treaties in BC. So you can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733. You can just hit pound 690 as well on your phone, or email bctoday@cbc.ca. And Karen is joining us from Richmond at Lulu Island. Hi, Karen.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Yes. And so do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I have a comment. The Cowichan deserve their land back. That's their land. They were here first, all right? So I believe they should at least give part of that land. And part of that land is on the Richmond golf course. So can they cut the golf course in half? Or, the Cowichan, that's the Cowichan land. They were here before we were. So I think we've got to, it's a fair play, they deserve it, right? And there's it's all white and Asian people in Richmond. I don't see any. It's mostly Asian and white people. There's no black people. There's no Indians here. It's really not well, it is multicultural. It's Asian and white.
So in terms of the specific question around the rights, the land rights of the Cowichan, you say, yes, why shouldn't that be the case? Karen, thank you very much for the call from Lulu Island. Let me go back to George Abbott. The concern that's been raised by the individual private landowners, although the Cowichan didn't seek declaration on privately owned lands, the city and those landowners say there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to their ability to sell, their ability to renew their mortgages. What do you make of those concerns?
Well, I think they're valid concerns, and of course, I'm sure there'll be some anxiety until the BC Court of Appeal rules, and probably if the parties go on to the Supreme Court of Canada, which is probable, it's unlikely that everyone will emerge from the Court of Appeal feeling great about their position. So there will be some insecurity for some time, without a doubt. But I would say this, that ultimately, whether it ends at the BC Court of Appeal or whether it ends at the Supreme Court of Canada, it is very likely that court will direct the parties back to negotiations. And I don't think that the Cowichan had an interest in affecting those fee simple titles. The declaration that was provided by Madam Justice Young was not requested, as I understand it, by the Cowichan. So I think people should feel that level of security, and I think they should also know that at some point post the final decision of the Supreme Court of Canada or the BC Court of Appeal, if it only goes that far, there will be, I think, a negotiation that will ensure that the landowners are kept whole. I don't think that they should be fearing drastic economic consequences from this.
How much of the uncertainty or this situation is exacerbated by the limited number of treaties in BC?
I think that's part of it. Actually, I think that's a good observation. One of the challenges with BC history, and again, extensively discussed in my book, is that unlike Canada, when British Columbia joined Canada in 1871, Canada was negotiating the numbered treaties east of the Rocky Mountains at that point in time, and in fact concluded the first of those numbered treaties in 1871 as British Columbia joined. But British Columbia was very unreceptive to engaging in treaty process, particularly in partnership with the federal government of the day. So we resisted treaty making for 120 years. It wasn't until 1991 that we get started on treaty. And I think the challenge of treaty is a whole lot more intense with a population of over 5 million British Columbians today versus 8,576 back in 1871. That's actually the white population then. And the government of the day contended that there wasn't enough land for us to share it with the Indigenous peoples of the time. And that legacy lives with us today because there has not been a lot of treaties and because it's taken so long to get the treaty train onto the tracks. I think it is a far more difficult issue today than in the past. I think you're absolutely right on that point, Rochelle.
So what progress is being made right now then? What are you working on?
Well, we're working on actually, and it's been so interesting because I had completed my book at the time that I was invited by the Minister of Indigenous Relations to be British Columbia's representative on the Treaty Commission. And it's been so interesting going to tables that are negotiating issues that were front and center in the book. As one example, because British Columbia refused to do reserve construction in advance of settlement, often First Nations were left with the guts and feathers of lands when in fact the treaty commissioners got around to, or the reserve commissioners got around to constructing the reserve. So in one case, the Williams Lake First Nation was left with not a square inch of land by the time the reserve commissioners got there. The federal government had to purchase a ranch to find a home for the Williams Lake First Nation. So they are today, along with three others in the Northern Shuswap Treaty Council, they are negotiating a modern treaty and making great progress at the table. Another one, the Cowichan, again, reduced their lands, pretty much to zero. And now trying to rebuild their nation through the treaty process. So I think it's a hugely important body of work that we are doing at the Treaty Commission. If we want to have a future that is not colored by an endless string of legal debates and legal cases and decisions, then we've got to double down. We've got to work even harder on the treaty processes to find some justice for nations who certainly were dealt injustice in the past.
My guest is George Abbott, the BC Treaty Commissioner, and his latest book is Unceded: Understanding British Columbia's Colonial Past and Why It Matters Now. And he's been kind enough to take your calls and your questions here on the open line. Our numbers again, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Your questions on the impact of the Cowichan Nation land rights ruling and the progress or what's being done at the BC Treaty Commission right now. Sabrina, Sabriana is calling us from Burnaby. Hi, Sabriana.
Hi there, long-time listener, first caller.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. First, I just want to say all the power to the Cowichan Tribe, and it's their land. This is not new, as your guest is saying. My worry about this whole situation, that it is the dark shadow of our colonial past, which unfortunately is a very segregated and racist past. So if we can't finish this and make do the wrongs we did in the past, how is the world supposed to take us seriously on the global stage, right? Like, we're supposed to be one country, and yet we can't even admit that all these things that we did were really shitty. And we need to make them right, plain and simple.
Sabriana, thank you. Some strong language there. Certainly, thank you very much for your call. And that's Sabriana in Burnaby. Joan is our next caller now in Vancouver. Hi, Joan.
Hi, how are you? I'm
very well. Thanks for calling in.
Well, I only wanted to make a point to Mr. Abbott's comment that this decision made in the court has no, long-term repercussions on landowners to not worry about it. And I am a landowner, and I am worried about it because I feel that British Columbia has more treaties with the Indigenous people, correct me if I'm wrong, than any of the other provinces in Canada. We have, set aside a lot of time and legal money to put these treaties in place. But I think we have a never-ending battle here. Reconciliation and all of the rest of it put aside, I think it's going to be a continuum of, like, they own it all.
Joan, thank you very much. And I'll put your comment to George Abbott. First, on the question of treaties, I think we talked about it a little bit, but please, go ahead with your response, George Abbott.
Sure. Well, I'll start with this, and I thank Joan for her question. First of all, we have, since 1991, we've completed 7 treaties. Some of those treaties involve more than one First Nation, so it's a little better than that. But there's still a very small portion of British Columbia that is covered by treaties. It is not true that British Columbia has more than the rest of Canada. That's not the case. Canada negotiated treaties back in the 1800s, by and large. As settlement went from east to west, the government of Canada attempted to negotiate treaties and succeeded in negotiating treaties as settlement moved across. So those things were sorted out typically as folks like my ancestors came along and took up preemptions on agricultural land as they went into Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and so on. In British Columbia, we didn't do that. We left the negotiation of reserves until after a lot of the land had been settled, and in fact, in some cases, all of the land had been settled. And the reserves that resulted from that public policy, which remained in place right through to the early 20th century, the result of that public policy was that reserves tended to be very small, particularly on the coast, where everyone was supposed to be a fisher person, and they were small, and they were of the poorer lands because often the best agricultural lands were taken up by white preemptions before the reserves were created. As a consequence, overall, reserves today in British Columbia constitute about 0.5% of the land base of the province, and as we complete treaties, we will not see 110% of the land base taken up by treaty nations. It will be far less than that, but it will be a little bit closer to what the federal government asked the provincial government to do in 1871, and that was to provide 80 acres per family. East of the Rocky Mountains, it had been up to 640 acres per family. They asked for 80. We would move a little bit closer, I think, to that mark with treaties by and large. They are far more generous than the original reserves. And doing that I think relieves us of the chronic demand through the legal system to find remedies. So, it's a fact of our history that we have to deal with now, and it's important that we do it. But it's not like First Nations have been given a great deal in this province. They have not. They have suffered historical injustices that still remain to be remedied.
Joan, thank you very much for the call from Vancouver. Steve is next on the line now in Kelowna. Welcome, Steve.
Hi there. How are you guys today?
Just fine.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for calling in. And what's your question about the impact of the Cowichan land rights ruling or about the treaty process?
Yeah, so my question would be, first, just to give you some context, I've recently started researching reconciliation and been fascinated by it. I never learned really much about it as a child and wanted to learn more and understand it now. So some of my question was previously answered from the caller before, but I guess my bulk of my question would be, in your opinion, what would be the perfect path moving forward for all Canadians, both Indigenous, both settlers, if you will? What would be the perfect path forward? What would it look like if it was perfect? I know there could never be perfect, but in a dream world, what would that look like? It may be a loaded question, I understand.
It's a big question, but a good question as we wrap up our conversation here with just a couple of minutes left. Steve, thank you so much. Yes, what do you see as the path forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for it, Steve. So what I would like to see as the perfect path forward is for First Nations in British Columbia to enjoy the same opportunities, the same choices that I enjoy today, because my family arrived in the early 1800s in Eastern Canada. They had the opportunity to take up lands in Ontario, in Manitoba, in Saskatchewan. They had an opportunity which in British Columbia, First Nations have long been denied. So I think the best way forward is through the treaty process, but I also like very much some of the reconciliation agreements, particularly the Lake Babine Nation Foundation Agreement of 2019. That's a non-treaty agreement that provides land and resources to the Lake Babine Nation. And again, it is conferring opportunities, it's conferring choices for the next generation of First Nations that several generations of the Abbott family have enjoyed in Canada. So that, in short, is where I hope we can go with this.
George Abbott, I really appreciate your taking the time for this discussion and taking calls from our listeners as well. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure and an honor. Thanks so much for inviting me.
George Abbott is the BC Treaty Commissioner. And we have an email here from Marion who writes, I was relieved to hear an answer to my question. Having ancestors and a mother from Treaty 6 in Alberta, I was shocked by the size of the reserves and lack of treaties when I arrived to teach on reserve in a small northern BC community in the 80s. I've always been flummoxed by the lack of treaties and the size of reserves in BC. Marion, thank you very much. bctoday@cbc.ca is our email address.